The wine glass didn't even fall. It wobbled, caught on the edge of the napkin, and some of the red splashed onto the tablecloth. That was all. But Tyler's hand came down hard and fast, one clean backhand across June's face. Her chair rocked slightly. Her breath caught, sharp and sudden, and then nothing. No one moved. No one gasped. Not even a fork scraped. June's eyes stared straight ahead. Wide and dry, Tyler laughed, soft and amused. "She's always clumsy," he said, dabbing the wine with a folded napkin like he was the one cleaning up a mess. His mother reached for the salt. His father picked up his beer. The conversation slid neatly back into a story about someone's promotion. I kept my hands folded under the table, fists clenched so tight my knuckles ached. I said nothing. I stood up and muttered something about needing the restroom, but I didn't go in. I stood in the hallway, facing the mirror, hands braced on the frame. I looked at myself like I was someone else, someone stunned, someone useless. My daughter had just been struck in front of me, in front of her in-laws, and not one person had so much as blinked. Not even me. I had taught June to never let anyone speak down to her. I taught her how to drive stick shift, how to walk away from rude men in bars, how to keep her voice steady in job interviews, but I never taught her what to do when the slap comes from someone she loves. I didn't even know what to do myself. Back at the table, Tyler was laughing again. June's voice floated toward me, light, controlled. She was making a joke about the wine like nothing happened. So I wiped my eyes, straightened my shoulders, and walked back in. I didn't sit down. Not yet. I reached for the serving dish and asked if anyone wanted more. My voice didn't shake, but my hands did. June followed me into the kitchen. Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "He's just stressed. Mom, work's been awful." He didn't mean. I turned toward her. She couldn't look me in the eye. "Is this the first time?" I asked. She hesitated. That pause told me more than anything else could. "Please don't make a scene." "Not tonight," she said quickly, brushing at a tear that hadn't fully formed. The words landed like stones in my chest. I nodded slowly and reached for the serving spoons. My hands felt like they belonged to someone else. When we returned to the dining room, Tyler was pouring another round of wine, cheerful as ever. He offered some to his father, then refilled June's glass without asking. His mother was talking about a lake house she'd seen online. Something about walking trails and privacy. No one mentioned what had happened. Not the slap. Not the look on June's face. Not the way Tyler's tone had shifted from charming to cruel and back again, like flipping a switch. I glanced around the room. The light fixture above the table. I helped them pick it. The rug beneath our feet, I paid for it. This house, every room carried pieces of me. I had co-signed the mortgage 3 years ago so they could start fresh. Now I felt like a visitor. No, not even that. A guest is welcomed. I was just tolerated, allowed to sit there as long as I didn't speak out of turn. June was smiling again, answering a question about school enrollment. Her napkin trembled in her lap. Tyler's laugh filled the space. I pushed the salad bowl closer to his mother, nodded when she mentioned real estate prices, and kept my expression neutral. The rules here were clear. Appear happy, don't question anything, and don't spill anything. I looked at my daughter, saw how tightly she was folded into herself, and realized she'd memorized every one of those rules. June's smile didn't reach her eyes. It lifted at the corners but never stayed. She nodded along to her mother-in-law's stories, laughed when Tyler joked about overpriced coffee, but her eyes darted constantly, first to Tyler, then to me, then back to her plate. I watched her cut her dessert into small pieces she never ate. Her fork moved, but she barely touched a thing. Tyler reached over at one point and wiped a crumb from the corner of her mouth. She flinched just slightly. No one else seemed to notice when the dishes were cleared and everyone wandered off to the den. I heard the sound of the sliding door creak open. A few minutes passed before I followed. June was on the back porch, curled up on the wicker bench, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "It was my fault," she said before I even sat down. "He told me not to open that bottle. I should have remembered." I didn't answer right away. I sat beside her, reached over, and rested my hand on hers. She didn't pull away. "You're not the problem," I said. She let out a shaky breath. "He's not always like that. Just when things are bad at work." He said I embarrassed him tonight. I could feel the chill in the air, but neither of us moved. Inside, Tyler's voice rose in a burst of laughter. He was talking with his brother about some game they used to play as kids. His smile was wide. He looked like the perfect husband. June looked down at her hands. She rubbed at the spot on her wrist where his grip had been earlier. She didn't cry. Neither did I. We just sat there, quiet, listening to the warmth of a house that didn't feel like it belonged to either of us anymore. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and overcooked sausage, but no one seemed to care. We were halfway through brunch when Tyler's father leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "You know, June's always been the sensitive type," he said, glancing toward her with a grin, tears at the drop of a hat. Tyler laughed along. "She cried during a car commercial last week." His mother chimed in. "She's just like Dalia. Always emotional. Remember how you used to call your mom every time the weather changed?" June didn't laugh. Her cheeks turned a deep red, and she focused hard on slicing her pancake into neat triangles. No one apologized. No one noticed. I watched the fork tremble slightly in her hand. She didn't say a word. She just nodded like she agreed. When the dishes were done and the table cleared, I offered to take Willa for the afternoon. I thought it might give June some space to breathe. Tyler barely looked up from his phone. "No thanks. We've got family plans." June kept her eyes on the counter. She didn't protest. She didn't even glance my way. I stood there for a moment, waiting for something to shift. Nothing did. So I gathered my coat and left. In the car, I gripped the steering wheel and stared at the front door. My breath came fast, uneven. This family felt like a performance I didn't know how to be part of anymore. Everything about them had hardened. The smiles were tight. The jokes always had a sharp edge. The silence after pain was intentional. I didn't start the engine right away. I just sat there listening to the hum of the neighborhood, the clink of dishes being put away inside. When I finally pulled away from the curb, my chest was still tight. Something in that house was wrong. Not just with Tyler, but with the way everyone had learned to fold themselves around him. I needed air, space, a voice that didn't come with an apology. And I knew exactly where I needed to go next. I didn't drive home. I pointed the car east toward the hills where Callum lived, in the old house with the screened porch and legal books stacked like furniture. He was my late husband's cousin, and though we hadn't talked much since the funeral, his last words to me had been, "If you ever need help with June, I'll be there." I parked under the shade of the same tree where we once held a barbecue. Back when June still wore cutoff shorts and called Callum uncle, he opened the door before I knocked. "You look like hell," he said, not unkindly. "I feel worse," I replied. He poured coffee and didn't ask anything else until we sat down at the table. Then I told him everything. The slap, the silence, the practiced smiles, the way June looked away when Tyler spoke, how she whispered that it was her fault. Callum didn't interrupt, just nodded slowly, his thumb tracing the rim of his mug. "You want legal steps," he said finally. "Or personal protection?" "I want her safe," I said. "And I want him to know I saw everything." He stood, disappeared into the back room, and came out with a slim file folder. He placed it on the table in front of me. "I kept the emergency trust in your name, just in case. It still has power. Still untouched." I stared at the folder, my breath catching for a moment. "You co-signed that house," he added. "That gives us an opening. I can transfer things quietly. You'll need to act fast, but you won't be alone." I nodded. There was no fear in me now, only movement. June had someone, and now so did I. I opened the folder and started reading. Monday morning came gray and still. I sat by the window with my tea growing cold, waiting for the sky to shift or my phone to buzz, whichever came first. It was June who reached out. Just a simple message. "Thanks again for coming. Sorry if things felt tense." I read it 3 times. Tense. That's what she called it. Not what it was, not what it meant. I set the phone down and picked up another. First, I called and told him I was ready. He said, "I've already drawn up the papers. We'll move everything through the trust." Then I called the private security firm he'd recommended, small, discreet, all former military. I didn't want anyone with badges. I wanted quiet, trained presence. Then I sat down at the desk and opened my old binder. Page after page of notes from my social work days. Shelters, therapists, legal contacts. I called Dr. Luring. Still practicing, still willing. Tell her she's not alone, she said. I hung up and looked around my living room, the one filled with baby photos and school crafts from when June used to drop Willa off on Saturdays. I opened a suitcase and packed it with clothes I knew June would feel safe in. Loose cardigans, Willa's pajamas, shoes that didn't make noise on hardwood floors. Then I opened my laptop and filed an incident report with Child Protective Services. I didn't give names, just facts, just in case. By sunset, everything had started moving. I had spent years asking questions, waiting for permission, hoping for someone to step in. Not anymore. Now I had lawyers, a plan, and 2 sets of keys. All I needed was for one window of time, just one moment where June didn't flinch. The locksmith finished faster than expected. Kvittman. He barely spoke, just nodded when I handed him the instructions and started drilling out the old deadbolt. Tyler pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later. I heard the car door slam before I saw him. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted, storming toward the porch. I was standing just inside the front door. June stood next to me, pale but upright, holding Willa close against her chest. Callum stepped forward before Tyler could enter. He held out the envelope. "You've been served," he said calmly. Tyler tore it open and skimmed the contents. His face turned blotchy, his voice sharp. "A restraining order?" He turned to June. "Are you serious?" Then to me. "You think you can just take my house?" I stepped forward. "My name is on the deed now. The transfer is legal. You'll find the documents are in order." "You sold it," he spat. "You transferred it behind our backs." "No," I said. "I took back what I should never have given freely." He looked to June, maybe expecting her to protest, to back him up. She didn't. She just stood there, one hand on Willa's back, the other gripping the banister. "Unbelievable," he muttered, backing down the steps. "You'll regret this." Callum didn't respond. Neither did I. Tyler screamed one last insult before getting in his car and peeling off down the street. I turned the lock behind him. The house went still. June let out a breath. I don't think she realized she'd been holding it. She sat down slowly, holding Willa tighter. I knelt beside her and rested a hand on her back. "We're okay," I said. "You're okay." She didn't answer. Not yet. But her eyes were finally still, not watching for him, not scanning the room. We stayed there. No yelling, no chaos, just silence. Real silence. It didn't take long for the version he wanted to spread. Tyler told his friends I was unstable, bitter, jealous of his life, that I manipulated June, took advantage of a rough patch in their marriage to stage some dramatic takeover. He should have known better. Callum said. A man like that only survives through perception. His mother texted June 2 days later. "This isn't how family behaves. You've humiliated us." June showed me the message. She didn't cry. She didn't even look angry. Just tired. Bone deep. I didn't say a word. I just reached for my folder and made a copy. That week, I filed for temporary guardianship of Willa. June agreed. She was attending regular counseling now, 3 sessions in. She needed space to heal without fear of custody games or manipulation. I enrolled Willa in a new daycare closer to my home, changed emergency contacts, and made sure every form had updated addresses. Tyler showed up at June's work 2 days later. He didn't yell. He smiled too much and asked to just talk. The front desk called security. He was escorted out without incident. June texted me afterward. He looked at me like I was a stranger, like I owed him something. I replied, "You don't owe him anything." I started keeping a red folder on the side table in the hallway. Every message, every visit, every call. I saved copies, wrote dates, and printed screenshots. I wasn't angry anymore. Not exactly. I was watching and I was ready. Because he wasn't just trying to win June back. He was trying to reshape the truth. To paint himself as the victim of an overbearing mother-in-law and a wife who cracked under pressure. But I knew the truth, and this time I wasn't going to let him be the one holding the brush. 3 weeks passed before I set the table again. Just 4 places. June, Willa, Callum, and my oldest friend Marion from the shelter board. No guests, no performance, no forced laughter. The food was simple. A warm stew, bread fresh from the bakery, and berries chilled in the fridge. Nothing fancy, nothing to prove. June arrived first, wearing a sweater I hadn't seen since college. Her hair was tied back loosely. No makeup, no hiding. She looked steady as we sat and passed the plates. The quiet wasn't heavy, it felt earned. No one interrupted. No one corrected. And then, somewhere between the second bite and the third story about Willa's preschool drawings, June set down her fork and said softly, "He hasn't called in days." She didn't sound afraid, she sounded surprised. Callum reached into his coat pocket and slid a folded paper across the table. "He won't," he said. "He signed." June blinked. "Signed everything?" Callum nodded. "No claim to the house, no custody, no visitation. Full release of any shared assets." June's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She just sat still, staring at the paper like it might change its mind. I stood, walked to the counter, and poured 2 glasses of sparkling cider. One for her, one for me. I raised mine not in celebration but in recognition of survival, of truth reclaimed, of silence finally free from fear. She touched her glass gently to mine. We didn't toast. We didn't need to. Callum leaned back with a satisfied breath, and Marion reached for another roll, smiling at Willa's latest crayon masterpiece taped to the fridge. The room held something I hadn't felt in months: ease. We weren't celebrating an ending. We were acknowledging a beginning when June reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm, not desperate, just certain. The kind of hold that doesn't need explanation. The kind of hold you remember. The porch was warm, and Willa had curled herself against my side with a blanket over her knees. She'd spent the whole afternoon drawing stars with a silver crayon, pressing them onto every spare scrap of paper she could find. June was inside, humming to herself as she loaded the dishwasher. There was something whole about her again, not fixed but healing. Her shoulders didn't fold inward anymore. She smiled when she passed mirrors. She'd started eating full meals. The bruises had faded. The silence had not. Willa shifted against me and asked, "Grandma, do moms always do what dads say?" I looked down at her, at the tiny crease between her brows. She was serious, thoughtful in that way kids are when they don't realize they've asked something enormous. I took a breath. "No, sweetheart," I said. "Moms do what's right, even when it's hard." She seemed to consider that. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, tucking it gently behind her ear. Then I said, "Can I tell you a story?" She nodded. I didn't start it with the slap. I didn't start it with the whine or the bruise or the sound of my daughter's voice shrinking inside her throat. I started it with the moment I stood up, the moment I packed a bag, the moment I made a call. I told her about choosing quiet protection over loud revenge, about the power of a locked door and the strength in signing your name on the right papers. She listened, not like a child listening to a bedtime tale, but like a girl memorizing a map. When she finally fell asleep against my arm, the crayon still clutched in her hand, I stayed there a while longer, not to watch the stars, but to remember the sound of a world finally made.